Now, just to go to the gloomier bits, the politics. The global political agreement is being implemented very, very slowly. One often gets the impression, I think, that with respect, Prime Minister, that the President is still running rings round your party. He maintains all the hard power. The law is not generally respected. There is still a culture of impunity. There is no real sense of a readiness now, in my belief, of Robert Mugabe and his ZANU-PF to lose power gracefully. The President, we mustn't get them mixed up. The President's health, there have been rumours about, but I reckon they're pretty thin rumours, to be frank. Of course, at age 86, he could go any day. So when people talk about a downward trajectory, of course, we're all on a downward trajectory. But the stumbles that he's been seen having and sleeping at meetings and so forth, I don't think that bespeaks imminent demise. And indeed, again, if you'll forgive me, Prime Minister, for quoting you, you had a meeting with him a few days ago and told me he seemed pretty up to speed. The violence has not, of course, ended. There is still a low intensity violence, particularly in the countryside. There has been no repeal of the Public Order and Security Act, better known as POSA, or the Access to Information, IPA, acts that are used repressively still all the time. On the economic front, and I'm sure this will be debated here, the Indigenisation and Economic Empowerment Bill has been gazetted under pressure from the inclusive government, particularly the MDC. It is being amended, and there's talk of new sectoral thresholds, maybe even down to 0% for some things, maybe 5 or 10% for mining and so forth. But there is still ministerial discretion, and I would suggest that if there were to be confidence and true investment, that bill has to be radically amended and not just mildly watered down, even though both parties agree that in principle the black majority must be empowered. Agriculture is still in terrible shape despite the advances that I mentioned. The infrastructure is dreadful. You drive around the country, as I did the other day, 200 or 300 kilometres. There's dreadful wilderness everywhere, shortage of fertilizer, terrible poverty. The land invasions are continuing, even though there aren't many commercial farms still to be invaded. There has not yet been a land audit, which is certainly needed as well. And, of course, the party that is still mainly in power, many of its people are still enriching themselves and grabbing much of the country's wealth. Now, I just want to talk very quickly to wrap up about diplomacy. In the run-up to that, I should say, I mean, this is the sceptical side. The sunny scenario, obviously, has a fair election in about 15 months, and as the Prime Minister said a few days ago, the expectation, he said there was an expectation that both sides would honour the result. Many of you here in the audience will think, why should that happen? And one of the reasons given, and again, I quote the Prime Minister, I hope he won't contradict me, that the old man wants to leave a legacy. He's looking for a strategy, an exit strategy, honoured retirement and so forth. Then one asks the question, well, why would the Securocrats in particular, the heavies in ZANU-PF, why should they ever want to give up? And are they not gearing up already to make sure that they didn't make what they see as the mistakes of the last time round in 2008, make absolutely sure that they win the election? Well, they may be doing so. And this is where I would like to just make a suggestion. I believe the diplomacy has got somewhat stuck, and that it is probably time, in fact not probably, it is time for some creative diplomacy. South Africa clearly is the leading diplomatic force in the region and must continue to be so. But President Mugabe has put out very quiet feelers, but not so quiet that people haven't advertised them and talked about them. For example, to the new British government. He's a funny old guy. He's a bit of a sentimentalist. For all his complexities, and we have Heidi Holland here, who wrote an interesting book about his remarkable personality. He is a bit of a sentimentalist. He is somebody who harks back to the past. He does remember the time when he had effective dealings with a Conservative government. And I believe that there is time for slightly more creativity on the sanctions versus fair elections front. I mean, that is the fundamental quid pro quo. Robert Mugabe talks about sanctions as though they're the reason for the demise of the country. This, of course, is not the case at all. The sanctions have very little effect on the broader economy. They are directed at 200 people and a handful of companies that are very closely tied in with ZANU-PF. However, I think it would be a good idea if the bluff of the President was called, and that with a certain amount of negotiation before and after, the West, alongside South Africa, which of course has never supported the personal targeted sanctions, says very loudly and clearly, we will lift sanctions if you promise to have a fair election. And that has to have a crucial rider to it, which is that it has to be properly observed. To be frank, and this may offend some of you here who are leading members of SADC, SADC, in my view, has not been robust, has not been honest in its observation of the elections. The elections would have to be much more widely observed, and the President will resist such a condition, but I think that could be obtained if the conditions are announced and Mugabe agrees to have not only fair elections but thoroughly observed elections. Then I think there is a good case for lifting sanctions. They can be put back on again, but I think there is a window of opportunity for creative diplomacy. Now, many people here will also say this is naive. Robert Mugabe is a very clever man. He's brilliant at juggling people, and above all, he's brilliant at tearing up agreements that he's made in the past. That may be so, but I see very little alternative. And it may not work, but I think the time has come for a little bit of extra diplomacy. South Africa, alongside the UK, the EU, and I should add with emphasis, the Commonwealth as well. Whatever Zimbabwe, whatever the President at the moment says about Commonwealth and speaks of it with contempt because Zimbabwe suspended itself before it was kicked out, Zimbabwe should be welcomed back into the Commonwealth, and I would very much like to see the Commonwealth involved in diplomacy as well. At that point, I think I will stop, and I apologize to everybody here if I've overrun, and particularly to the Prime Minister, and I know that he is the person, not me, that you want to hear. Thank you very much.